Whenever you see me on your screens, you know that it's time for China Now, your weekly news report of what's happening in China. I am Makiza Latifa, so we'll start with China currents as usual. Today's segment features some news about Chinese football and the 2023 Asian Cup, which ended on January 23rd. Also, Chinese ambassador to the United States, Feng, held a meeting with the director of the U.S. White House National Drug Control Policy Office, Gupta, regarding bilateral cooperation in the field of drug control. There's more details of these and many other compelling stories coming up on China Currents with Kris. Please stay with us.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to China Currents. I'm Kris. Let's start this week's episode with a rather amusing story. In an unexpected twist that has captured the hearts of netizens, He Ye, a giant panda known as a dude for over 3 years, was revealed to be actually female. This revelation from Chengdu giant panda breeding research base has taken the internet by storm, climbing to the top of trending searches. Through a post on its WeChat public account, the research base shared a video where the caretaker, affectionately known as Grandpa Tan, disclosed the results of a recent expert assessment. He Ye and his, or should I say her, sibling He Hua are in fact sisters. This gender correction has left many followers of He Ye bewildered and amused. Grandpa Tan explained that determining the gender of pandas can be quite complex. When He Ye was born, her features leaned male, but the male traits became less distinct as she grew older. Experts then collected biological samples which showed He Ye is female. This is not the first instance of gender confusion among pandas. He Ye's father, Mei Lan, was also initially mistaken for a female. I guess the X and Ys of this particular panda family are quite naughty. Experts say giant pandas are among the hardest mammals to identify gender when young, and traditional methods like observing the physical reproductive organ differences often don't work well for panda cubs until they are 3 to 4 years old, and more reliable methods involving blood tests and other biological analysis, which are now routinely done to conclusively determine gender. And next up, let's take a look at the Chinese football. On January 23rd, Group A of the 2023 Asian Cup concluded its matches in Doha, with the Chinese national team losing 0-1 to the host nation Qatar, while Tajikistan secured a 2-1 victory over Lebanon. As a result, Qatar triumphed with 3 wins out of 3 games, leading the group and advancing to the knockout stage with the top spot. And Tajikistan followed, qualifying for the last 16 with 1 win, 1 draw and 1 loss, totaling 4 points. And the Chinese team, with 2 points, finished third in the group. Chinese football is in the middle of the nationwide anti-corruption campaign. Both the former president of the Chinese Football Association and a former coach of the national men's team were arrested in the late last year. Next up, on January 22nd, Chinese ambassador to the United States, Feng, held a meeting with the director of the U.S. White House National Drug Control Policy Office, Gupta. The two officials engaged in frank and in-depth discussions regarding bilateral cooperation in the field of drug control. And during the meeting, Ambassador Xie stressed the need for both sides to adhere to the spirit of mutual respect, rule of law, and professionalism. He also urged the promotion of cooperation in various areas of drug control, practicing law enforcement, collaboration, and the facilitation of stable, healthy, and sustainable development in China-US relations. And Director Gupta expressed his commitment to implementing the consensus reached during the meeting between the leaders of the two countries. The discussions between the Chinese and US officials are expected to pave the way for enhanced cooperation and coordination in combating the global drug trade. Both nations recognized the urgency and complexity of the issue and emphasized the importance of international collaboration to address the challenges posed by drug-related crimes. It also serves as another step forward in strengthening the bilateral relationship between China and the United States. Next up, in a recent release of economic data, 25 provinces in China have disclosed their respective GDP figures for the previous year. Among them, Guangdong province has emerged as a front-runner. surpassing the milestone of 13 trillion yuan, solidifying its position as the powerhouse in the nation's economy. Additionally, Shandong, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang provinces have also performed exceptionally well, exceeding growth expectations. Jiangsu is approaching the same milestone with a growth rate of 5.8%, and similarly, Shandong and Zhejiang have achieved impressive growth rates of 6%, reaching the 9 trillion yuan and 8 trillion yuan thresholds respectively. Among the 25 provinces, 15 provinces outperformed the national average growth rate of 5.2%. With the convening of local two sessions in 2024, various provinces have started unveiling their major economic data for 2023, along with their economic development targets for the year ahead. As of now, 25 provinces have published specific GDP figures for 2023, with 20 of them setting growth targets for 2024 in their government work reports. As China moves forward, these provinces will undoubtedly play crucial roles in driving economic progress and fostering innovation. The government's focus on promoting high-quality development and nurturing emerging industries will further bolster their economic performances and contribute to the overall prosperity of the country. Next up, Alibaba. In a significant shift within Alibaba Group's corporate hierarchy, Jack Ma, the company's co-founder, has now become its largest individual shareholder. This development follows Ma's recent acquisition of Alibaba shares valued at approximately $50 million in the last quarter, surpassing his previous shareholding of 4.3% at the end of 2021. And Ma's increased investment marks a notable change in the e-commerce giant's stock ownership structure. The second largest shareholder is now Alibaba's current chairman Cai Chongxin, also known as Joe Tsai, who boosted his stake to 1.4% through share purchases by his family investment vehicle, the report says. In contrast, the shareholding of Alibaba's formerly largest stakeholder, Japanese conglomerate SoftBank, has steadily declined. According to the Morgan Stanley calculations cited in the report, SoftBank, controlled by Masayoshi Son, has pared its Alibaba holdings from around 7% in December 2022 to about 2% by March 2023, further dropping below 0.5% by May through forward contracts. Next up, according to China's Workers' Daily Report on January 24th, for the first time, Chinese courts have officially recognized the act of engaging in substantive work using chat software after regular working hours as overtime. The case involved a plaintiff named Miss Li, who had been working at a technology company. Miss Li argued that her communication and interactions with clients and colleagues on social media after office hours should also be considered overtime work. Submitted WeChat chat record and official duty roster for holiday community files as evidence. However, the defendant company contended that since Miss Li was the head of the operations department, any calls she received from employees or clients after work hours should not be classified as overtime. In a subsequent appeal, Judge Zheng Jizhe of the Beijing Third Intermediary People's Court pointed out that the use of social media for work-related purposes after regular working hours and on holidays went beyond mere communication. The nature of the work involved had characteristics of periodicity and fixity, differentiating it from occasional and incidental communication. This reflected employers' labor management practices, leading to the conclusion that it should be recognized as overtime. As a result, the court ordered the company to pay Ms. Li a sum of 30,000 yuan as compensation. And Feng, the president of the Beijing High People's Court, stated that this ruling establishes clear criteria for identifying invisible overtime and safeguards the legitimate rights and interests of the workers in the digital era. Next up, let's wrap up China's anti-corruption campaign in 2023. On January 25th, China's top anti-corruption agency, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, revealed on its official website that it received 1.057 million allegation reports in 2023. Out of this, 626,000 cases were filed, resulting in disciplinary measures against 610,000 individuals. The disciplined individuals included 49 officials at the provincial and ministerial level, 3,144 officials at a department and bureau level, and 24,000 officials at a county and division level, and 82,000 officials at a township and section level, and 85,000 general officials. Additionally, disciplinary actions were taken against 470,000 individuals from rural areas, enterprises, and other sectors. The CCDI also disclosed that it initiated cases against 17,000 individuals involved in bribery and transferred 3,389 individuals to the Public Prosecutor's Office. The anti-corruption campaign highlights China's ongoing efforts to tackle corruption at all levels of government and society, demonstrating the authorities' commitment to upholding integrity and maintaining clean governance. Last but not least, let's take a look at the weather here in China. Beginning the evening of January 21st, cities including Changsha and Nanchang welcomed snowfall, spurred by the first cold wave of the year 2024. The National Meteorological Center issued a blue cold wave warning, a blue gale warning, and a yellow heavy snowfall warning at 6 a.m. on January 22nd. The forecast from January 22nd at 8 a.m. to January 23rd at 8 a.m. predicts heavy snow to blizzard conditions in parts of southern Hunan, central and southern Jiangxi, southwestern Zhejiang, northwestern Fujian, northeastern Guangxi, and northern Guangdong. And temperatures are expected to plummet, with the minimum temperature reaching 0 degrees Celsius in the northern part of Guangxi and Guangdong. Residents in affected areas are advised to prepare for severe weather conditions, and relevant authorities are on alert for any emergency response measures as a cold wave progresses. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts and comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below. I'm Kris, looking forward to hearing from you, and see you next time.
Thanks, Kris. Next on the show is Threshold with Lisa, where you get tech-related updates and groundbreaking scientific discoveries happening in today's China. So today, Lisa is going to talk to you about the ocean's temperatures, since it seems to have experienced the hottest temperatures ever recorded in 2023. She'll tell you what may have accounted for that, and by extension, the irreversible consequences of climate change.
In 2023, the oceans experienced the hottest temperature ever recorded. Hi, I'm Lisa and welcome to Threshold. Today we are going to talk about the ocean's temperature. On the 11th of January 2024, a report from an international team of 34 scientists revealed that the global average sea surface temperature in 2023 rose by about 0.23 degrees Celsius compared to 2022. This may seem like a small change, but it has a great impact on our world. Not only did the sea surface temperatures reach a record high, but the upper 2,000 meters of the ocean also absorbed an additional 15 plus or minus 10 zetajoules of heat in 2023 compared to 2022. This surpasses all previously observed values for ocean heat content from 0 to 2,000 meters since 1960. To put the 15 zetajoules into perspective, it's enough energy to evaporate 2.3 billion Olympic-sized swimming pools filled with water. Or it could bring Lake Baikal, the world's largest freshwater lake, to a boil. Another way to understand this is that it is equivalent to around 1.85 million 2,000 kilowatt wind turbines running at full capacity for 100 years. These unprecedented ocean temperatures serve as a stark reminder that climate change is happening at an alarming rate. It has a tangible effect on our oceans. One immediate impact is that the intensification of ocean stratification, which refers to the layering of water based on temperature and density. Normally, the ocean have a structure where the surface is lighter and the deep waters are heavier. As the surface warms, it becomes lighter, creating a barrier that prevents the mixing of nutrient-rich deep waters with the surface. This disruption affects the balance and health of marine ecosystem and has already led to a decline in Black Sea fisheries. But the consequences goes far beyond marine life. The ocean, as Earth's largest thermal reservoir, plays a crucial role in regulating global weather patterns. Changes in ocean temperatures directly impact atmospheric and ocean circulation patterns, leading to more frequent extreme weather events that have severe impact on our lives. We've already seen examples such as Storm Daniel with extensive flooding in Libya and Super Typhoon Doksuri causing a once-in-200 years rainstorm in Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei region in China. The record ocean temperatures are affecting exclusive economic zones in the ocean. For example, coastal and island tourism along the Mediterranean Economic Zone faced challenges from the hottest Mediterranean summer on record in 2023, including heat waves and wildfires. Industries in these regions are facing huge challenges. Fishing communities are also impacted, with the fishing migration pattern severely impacted due to the warming waters. Tuna stocks, for example, are now harder to find, and this jeopardizes the livelihood of generations of those who have relied on sea for centuries. And so it's not just about tourism, it is also about our food security. Additionally, hurricanes, heat wave, and other extreme weather events can damage energy infrastructure like power grids and offshore wind farms, disrupting energy production. Extreme weather events and rising sea levels can also damage transportations and logistic networks, which in turn affects the global supply chains. And so the negative impacts of ocean warming are widespread. On the 17th of November 2023, the global average temperature exceeded 2.07 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, surpassing the critical 2 degrees Celsius threshold set by the Paris Agreement for the first time. The World Meteorological Organization has issued warnings emphasizing the urgent need for rapid emissions reductions to meet the 2 degrees Celsius target. Without immediate action, we are heading towards the irreversible consequences of climate change. It is easy to feel disconnected from numbers and reports, but the reality is that climate change is happening right now. And that is all for today's Threshold. As usual, we welcome your feedback and thoughts.
Well, that does it for Threshold with Lisa. Up next is the Thinkers Forum. Now, have you ever wondered why Taiwan is an integral part of China? Well, we have the author of the book titled Powerful, Different, Equal, Peter Walker, on the first part of today's Thinkers Forum to address this and also other very important topics. Let's keep rolling to hear what he has to say.
Today, I'm going to focus on the subject of Taiwan, which is very timely for a couple of reasons. One is, as many of you know, Taiwan just had their election within the last week. And then the second, more fundamental reason is Taiwan is an absolute top priority strategic issue for China. And therefore, it's in the news a lot. And what I really want to focus on today are some of the fundamentals of Taiwan as we think about it. So let me start with the first point. How strong is China's case that they are the legitimate owners of Taiwan, and Taiwan is an integral part of China? From my point of view, the China case is pretty strong for a couple of reasons. One, Taiwan has been part of China since the 17th century, so a great deal of history. Secondly, China lost Taiwan to the Japanese in the Sino-Japanese War in 1895. So it was part of the century of humiliation, where a foreigner basically came in and took it away, just as the British had taken away Hong Kong. The third thing is that if you look at the Civil War, the US wound up backing the nationalist Chinese, who lost, obviously, and the nationalist Chinese basically retreated to Taiwan and took it over and governed it for a number of years. And then finally, and this is really the major point, is that after the Nixon-Kissinger visit to China and the warming up of relations between the US and China, you had formal relations established between the US and China in 1979, and that included a one China policy that basically recognized that there was one China, it was mainland China, and Taiwan essentially is part of China. Now, since that declaration, which has been bought into by virtually almost all the countries around the world, When you go back over history, and when you think about the fact that Taiwan is made up of Han Chinese and Confucian values are as strong in Taiwan as they are in China, and then you add to it the formal recognition of the US and then most of the rest of the major countries that China is the official leader of Taiwan, then that has real influence on how the rest of the world reacts to whatever happens between the US and China on the issue of Taiwan. Let's look at the next issue. What are the cultural considerations that the West really pays very little attention to that actually have a significant influence on how China winds up treating Taiwan? It's easy to just think about Taiwan as a landmass with a border that's 100 miles away from the China coast. But what that misses is the fact that China is a civilization state. And by civilization state, what I mean is that it's a single nationality or ethnic group, which are the Han, which account for 92%, which is very different from almost any other major country. Certainly, the US has been for many years a melting pot. And that's one of the reasons we have so much division in the US today, is there are very different groups with very different interests. That's not true in China and Taiwan. They are both Han and they're both Confucian. So you have to think of Taiwan as part of the Chinese nation and part of the Chinese civilization. So it's not simply an island that China would like to, quote, own. It's made up of Chinese people with Chinese beliefs. And that has a very significant influence on the next cultural issue, which is basically the fact that China has, for its history, been a very peaceful country. You know, if you go back over the last 1,000 years, China has initiated war with other countries 3 times in 1,000 years, and all 3 were minor. And a lot of that goes back to the art of war, which is a military classic coming out of China, that basically had the interesting idea that the best way to win a war is to never resort to violence. And that's very different from the West. Certainly, if you look at the record in the US over the last 60 years, the number of invasion of foreign countries by the US, even though in every case there would be a story as to why it was appropriate, the reality is the US was the aggressor and remained so for a long period of time. So now let me switch over to the election and what we can learn from the election. You know, at first blush, the DPP, which is the governing party right now in Taiwan, was reelected with the leading number of votes among the 3 major parties. And so you would say, okay, it's a continuation of the DPP, and the DPP is the most favored of independence for Taiwan of the 3 parties. But if you look behind the numbers, there's more than that going on. The DPP won 40% of the vote, which means 60% of the vote, the majority of the people, basically are with parties who want to retain the status quo between China and Taiwan. And then finally, if you look at the legislature, DPP controlled the legislature prior to this election. It lost control of the legislature in this election, which means their ability to push their own agenda is going to be very modest at best.
Very interesting revelations and points succinctly made. Now, on the second part of today's Thinkers Forum, we'll hear from the former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, on the precarious state of European democracy and how the fragmentation of the continent can be boiled down to this state.
The European crisis, which is getting worse and worse since 2015, deeper and deeper. The shift to the right, to fascism, to racism, to xenophobia, the subjugation to Washington and NATO and the United States of the whole of Europe. This is one story. These are not separate stories. One story, the decline, permanent decline of Europe, and it's drifting in a reactionary, misanthropic direction. It's soul destroying what's happening, because you see the problem, it's not, if only that were the problem, that is a symptom. What happens is we have two kinds of authoritarianism, two kinds of malignancies, if you want. We have the authoritarianism of the so-called liberal establishment in Brussels, in Paris, in Germany. They're extremely authoritarian. When I was the finance minister of Greece, I saw them in action. They talk about democracy, but they hate democracy. Their one nightmare that they have is actual democracy. The people who talk about democracy are the ones who are working very hard to ensure that democracy is a system that legitimizes whatever it is that they do. But if the people, the demos, go against what they want, they just completely annul it. It's propaganda that they care about democracy. So you've got this authoritarian liberal center. And then you've got the reaction to that, which is the fascist, racist, xenophobic alt-right. But these two, which appear as enemies, are essentially the two different sides of exactly the same coin. They are symbiotic with one another. I'll give you a very specific example. Take the president of France, Emmanuel Macron. I know him personally. He's fine. I actually quite liked him when we used to talk and exchange ideas and so on. But he's the representation of this liberal authoritarian establishment. He sounds very liberal, very democratic, but he's head of a government that is, as we speak, it is presiding over pogroms against French citizens of an ethnic Arab background. They introduce laws by which they can take away your citizenship if you're an Arab French person without you knowing it. No rule of law. This is what the alt-right are proposing. So Macron is in power. He's only in power because he's opposed to the alt-right. People elected him because he was not Le Pen, because he was not the alt-right, in opposition to the alt-right. But in government, he introduces the legislation of the alt-right. And he needs the alt-right to be against him so that he remains in government, to do what the alt-right wants. It's a great paradox. At the same time, the alt-right needs Macron. Le Pen should thank Macron every day, because the reason why she's doing well in the polls is because of her opposition with Macron. So this opposition is a fake opposition. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm sure they don't like each other. But that's not the point. They need each other. They may hate each other, but they need each other, because Le Pen would not be Le Pen without Macron. Macron would not be Macron without Le Pen. Why are the Europeans xenophobic all of a sudden? It's not that they suddenly decided that they're against the Arabs, the Chinese, the Muslims, and so on. No, it's because Europe is failing economically. Middle-class families are finding it very hard to make ends meet. They cannot see a future for their children which is as good as the past that they had. So they're getting angry. And when the people get angry, it's really very easy for racists, xenophobes, to rise to the polls. All you have to do is get up and say it's the foreigners' fault, the Jews, the Muslims, the Chinese. That's the easiest way of gaining support at a time when the many, the majority, are suffering, are struggling, when you have recession. So yes, it's been very hard, because you see, it's like you are between a rock and a hard place. The rock of the liberal establishment and the hard place of the neo-fascist xenophobes. And because they are supposedly fighting with one another, if you're trying to be in between and to be neither with one nor the other, you get squashed. And we've been squashed. There's no doubt about that. The question of racism, I mean, in my country, in 2015, when I was in government, we didn't have any racism. People were coming, refugees were coming on our shores. Throughout the summer of 2015, we had more than 1 million people that arrived on our shores. 1 million, it's a small country. This is not China, right? We are 10 million souls. 1 million arrive in a country of 10 million. That is a lot. It's a lot. And people rushed to the coast, to the beach, to the coastline to assist, to help the refugees. Okay, now, 8 years later, we're building walls, and it's pushing back the boats at sea, killing them. I mean, there's just not even criminal negligence, there is criminal intent. 6 months ago, there was a boat laden with 700 people, of whom 300 were children. And the Greek Coast Guard tried to tow them away from Greek waters in the middle of the sea. The vessel capsized, they all drowned, all 600 out of the 700, including 300 children. So we committed that crime against humanity. And people don't care. Why? Because after all those years, they've lost hope, caught up between these two authoritarians. There's no doubt that we had corruption in Greece, we still do. We always did, and we continue to have corruption in Greece. But the bankruptcy of Greece has nothing to do with corruption. Let me give you an example. We have a neighboring country just above us, north of Greece, called Bulgaria. Bulgaria and Greece are quite similar in the sense that we are semi-corrupt, low productivity, low investment, amongst the poorer countries in Europe. Nobody talks about the bankruptcy of Bulgaria because Bulgaria didn't go bankrupt. Why didn't they go bankrupt? Not because they were less corrupt, not because they did things better. No, the reason is the euro. We were in the euro and Bulgaria was not in the euro. In brief, when we had our own currency, the weakness of the Greek economy meant that every month the Greek currency was going down. It was devaluing because we had a deficit, we had a current account deficit, a trade deficit, and therefore, like in every country, if you've got a chronic deficit, except for the United States of America, because the United States of America is a separate case, it's a different beast altogether. But for every other country in the world, when you have a constant trade deficit, your currency goes down. And that slide of your currency stabilizes the economy because it makes imports more expensive, exports cheaper, so it pushes your trade deficit back towards zero. It's a stabilizing force, the exchange rate. Also, when we had the Greek drachma, right, German banks didn't want to lend to the Greeks. But then we get into the euro in the year 2000. Bulgaria does not get into the euro, right? So effectively, the euro is the Deutschmark. Let's not beat about the bush here. It's not a coincidence that the Central Bank of Europe is next to the Central Bank of Germany, which is in Frankfurt. It is the same. It's the same currency. What happened was that Germany extended its currency to Greece, which means that Germany controlled the currency. Suddenly, the Greeks become fantastic customers for German bankers. Because even though we may be poor compared to the Germans, we have something the Germans don't have. We owned our homes. 80% of Greeks owned the home in which they lived. They didn't pay rent. So you have an asset. Oh, good thing. You are an ideal customer for a banker if you have your home. And secondly, the Greeks didn't have debt. Families in Greece in the year 2000 didn't have debt. There were no credit. People didn't have credit cards. They didn't have mortgages. They had low incomes, but they owned their home and they didn't have debt. Therefore, they were the German bankers' best possible customer. That's what a banker wants, a customer with collateral and no debt and an income. After the financial crisis of Western capitalism in 2008, which exactly as in 1929, 2008 was our generation's 1929. I mean, the similarities are uncanny. It begins with Wall Street. There is a banking collapse. That banking collapse rolls over to Europe, to Britain, the city of London, to Frankfurt, the banks there, the banks in Paris. And very soon after that, you have a recession. You have the weakest links of the chain, countries that are weakest and more prone to deficits and debts collapse, like Greece, Ireland, Portugal, then Italy, Spain. There is a domino effect. Governments impose harsh austerity on the lower classes, the working classes, while printing billions for the financiers, for the banks to refloat them, to bail them out. And that started the process of fragmenting the European Union, of Europe, of pushing our peoples apart, of turning the Germans against the Greeks against the Germans, the French against everyone. When in reality, what has been happening is there was always a cartel of big business and big finance that was creating the circumstances for this crisis. And then when the crisis happened, the innocent people of Europe paid for that cartel. Every single German bank and every single French bank went bankrupt in 2008, 2009, which means they stopped lending the Greeks, the Greek banks. And the Greek citizens, when you've taken debt, you need to keep taking more loans to repay the previous loans, to keep rolling the loans over. If your banker says, you owe me 100 million won or euros or whatever, and I'm not going to extend this, give it back to me now, you go bankrupt. You can't repay it all at once because your banker doesn't want to extend the loan anymore. So that's why Greece went bankrupt. If the European Union, if the government in Germany, for instance, were to allow the Greek state to tell the truth, that we're bankrupt, we cannot repay those debts. If we admitted that, then it would be the German government that would have to give even more money to Deutsche Bank to bail out. Now, that was a catastrophe because the money they gave to Greece, they didn't give it to Greece. The money went through the Greek Ministry of Finance all the way back to Deutsche Bank. Okay, none of that money went to Greece. Instead, what went to Greece in the middle of a recession was huge austerity. So we had a reduction of wages by 40% in the middle of a recession, a reduction of pensions, 40%, huge increase in taxes. So the economy went into a nosedive. That didn't happen in Bulgaria. Now, didn't they know that if you do that, it's like killing the cow that you want milk from? So they wanted their money back, supposedly, right? But they were killing the cow that would produce it, the Greek economy. Didn't they know that? Yes, of course they knew that. They knew they would never take their money back. They just wanted to bail out their own banks. The facts are terrible. Here are some basic facts that cannot be disputed. The country went bankrupt in 2010, officially. Everybody agrees with that. If you look at our debt today, back then it was 300, today it's 410, our debt. Our income is today lower than it was in 2010, lower. So compared to the day we were bankrupt, we have less money and more debt. Where's the recovery? We have less investment today than we had in 2010. We have less investment today than we had in 2004 or 2002. We have wages that are lower today than they were in 2010 with prices that are much higher. Where is the recovery? And finally, we have lost 1 million people. 10% of the population have migrated. And these are young people, well-educated people. This is the real capital of Greece. They've stabilized Greece, but in a way that you stabilize a patient who is in a coma. The fact that somebody is in a coma, okay, yeah, he or she is stable, but doesn't mean that they're healthy. This is why politics acquires such a bad name in Europe and why democracy is finished in Europe, because people don't believe it. They know their politicians are lying to them. They're working on behalf of bankers. They are, even if the people elect a government like the one I was part of, to go against this, that government is overthrown because I was overthrown. Imagine if a foreign power could switch off every ATM in your country. That's financial terrorism. That's what they did to us. The media is controlled by the same people who control the ATMs. It's really very simple. It's not that complicated. This is not a conspiracy theory. But in this country, in my country, take the television channels. There are 5 television channels. Each one is owned by an oligarch who owns the power stations. They didn't own the electricity power stations 10 years ago when I was in government, after my prime minister surrendered. These oligarchs got the power stations. They're laughing all the way to the bank. Imagine being given a power station in the middle of an electricity crisis. It's really brilliant. It's like having your own ATM in your own living room, right? And you own the television channel. Now, that television channel is not going to present something like what I said to you, because it goes against the interest of the owner of the television channel. They would be mad to put somebody like me on. And when they do put me on, they make sure that I'm never heard, that they always interrupt me. And then when I leave the studio, then they talk about the man who destroyed Greece and Europe and, whatever. But that's perfectly natural. If you hand over the news outlets to the oligarchs who benefit from the surrender of the Greek people and the European people, well, this is the blanket propaganda that you're going to get. But it really is becoming laughable because, as you know, there's a terrible war happening north of Greece in Ukraine. In the last 2 years of this war, awful war, I think the news bulletins of the Greek media are very instructive, not just for here, for Greece, but also for you far away. Because you see the hypocrisy of power in full technical. I'll give you an example, right? Now, every single television channel, because they are completely in tune with Brussels and Washington, supports Zelensky, Ukraine against Russia and so on. I'm not judging that. I'm simply relating it to you. They have the Ukrainian flag. People like me, I consider Putin to be a monster, but I also consider what NATO is doing in Ukraine to be a crime. The never-ending war, the endless war that Washington wants. Essentially, again, Putin and the United States need one another because they both benefit a lot from this war. The only people who lose out are the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Europeans and the Africans, whose food prices are going up through the roof. Anyway, just the fact that I do not take NATO's line that we should be with Zelensky and with the Azov battalion, and the Ukrainian troops must invade Crimea and they must take Moscow, just because I don't agree with that, because I think this is madness, absolute madness, and very dangerous for a third world war and so on. I'm being portrayed by these channels as Putin's slave, as somebody who is a stooge of Putin, which is a joke. They are so gung-ho, these channels, in favor of Zelensky in Ukraine. The same owners of those channels carry 65% of Putin's oil. You see what I mean by hypocrisy? Their channels are Zelensky. Their tankers are carrying Putin's oil. Then they made sure that they used their immense narrative power, propaganda power, their monopoly of the media, in order to make sure that nobody outside the world hears anything about Greece, except that Greece is now fine, that it is flying high, that the economic crisis is finished. So if the problem is a European problem, the solution cannot be one based on the nation state. It has to be a European solution. In 2015, 2016, some of us realized that the number one priority was to unite the people of Europe, to stop this process of turning the North against the South, the East against the West, to making it clear to the people of Europe that this is not a clash between the rich North and the poor South, but it is a clash between a cartel of big business, which is located everywhere. So it's hard to keep going, but there's no alternative to keep going.
And that's all for the show today. Grateful for your time this morning. Please send in your comments and feedback as always through the email provided below. My name is Makiza Latifa, and I'll see you same time next week. Good morning.